Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our donor appreciation event. We're very excited to have you. My name is Renato Zane, and I'm the volunteer chair of the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society Foundation, and very happy to have you with us today. Before we officially begin, for those of you who have joined in the last few minutes, just wanted to make sure that I can pass along some tips to make this experience the best possible one for today. So the first thing is, make sure that your speakers are working and you have the right output selected. To test that, what you need to do is to just click the audio settings at the bottom left corner of your screen. And you also make sure that your volume is turned up on your computer or whatever device you're using today. Secondly, to ask questions, please use the chat function to ask questions. So for those of you who are not familiar with this software, it's very easy. All you have to do is go to the bottom of your screen and simply click the chat button, and that's in the shape of a cartoon bubble, as they would in comic books, for example. So it says chat, and there's an icon there of a little bubble. You click on that, and a screen will open on your right-hand side, and that's where you can communicate by writing down your questions for, especially for Dr. Fidel at the question and answer session that we're going to have later on. And if you have any technical issues, you can also write it, just let people know in the chat that you're having some technical issues, okay? So we can formally begin. So welcome to the BC Schizophrenia Society's annual Donor Appreciation event. We hope that you will enjoy this presentation from the comfort of your home, office, or home office. We are thrilled that this web event can reach people across the province and not just those in the Lower Mainland. As I said earlier, my name is Renato Zane, and I'm the volunteer chair with the BC Schizophrenia Society Foundation Board. And this event is really our opportunity to thank you for your generosity and to show you how your donations have made a difference to families across British Columbia. We're fortunate that one of our generous sponsors, the Otsuka-Lundbeck Alliance, recognizes the importance of this and includes this special event as one of the many activities it supports at BC Schizophrenia. We're very grateful for their support. It means that thanks to Otsuka, not a single donor dollar was diverted from our programs to pay for this event. So thank you, but more on Otsuka in a few minutes. So we have an interesting lineup for you today, and we sincerely hope you will enjoy the next hour or so with us. Today, you will hear from the Chief Executive Officer of the BC Schizophrenia Society. You will also hear a mother's story of how schizophrenia affected her family. And we will have a question and answer session with a researcher from the University of British Columbia School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry, Dr. Fidel Vila-Rodriguez. But above all, really, this event is about you, our donors. We're so very grateful for your support. We hope you will notice your name on the screen during this special virtual event. It's new for us, and we hope it'll go well. As you know, the mandate of the foundation is to raise funds in support of the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society, including family support programs, advocacy, and education. The foundation is also charged with administering the allocation of funds to support scientific research relevant to schizophrenia and related illnesses. This year, the foundation has been experimenting with some new initiatives as we continue our quest to inform, educate, and attract new sources of funding to support the society. In the summer, we organized our first campaign focused on promoting monthly donations. We were blessed by a donor who offered to match donations up to $10,000, and we are very grateful to all of those who took up the challenge. We are also very excited to be building a new website, and that will be launched in the spring. We're looking at the corporate sector and plan to forge new ties with companies and their employees. Thanks to the efforts of former BCSS board member Matthew Langlois, we have established a relationship with the students of the British Columbia Institute of Technology's Marketing Association, who are working with us with the goal of doubling our fundraising in connection to next year's Scotia Run. We are also continuing our partnership with the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research to fund research projects focused on schizophrenia and psychosis. And we're very proud to have organized our own competition this fall for funding in schizophrenia-related research. More details on that a little later. Before I introduce the CEO of the BC Schizophrenia Society, Fidel Aldridge, I would like to take a moment to recognize the volunteers who serve on the foundation board. They are Jeff Bagshaw, Bob Baker, Elaine Pura, Bob Kenward, Joanne Leung, who serves actually on both boards as our treasurer, and Chris Sandy. For the last 4 years, Chris has been the chair of this fall campaign. And in each of these years, he has made the offer to personally match donations up to a total of $10,000. He does this in memory of his younger brother, Dave, who sadly is no longer with us. If you're not familiar with Dave's story, you can read all about it in Chris's letter on the BCSS website. We are deeply honored and appreciative to Chris for his commitment and for his dedication to our cause. We applaud him. Now, as promised, I present Phaedra Aldridge, CEO of the BC Schizophrenia Society, who will provide an update on the society activities during this difficult year.
Hello, everyone. Well, welcome. My name is Phaedra Aldridge, and I'm the CEO of BCSS. I know this event looks just a little bit different than it did last year, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And I am so honored to work for BCSS and to be able to share this time with you. So thank you for being here. But before we get started, there are a few people we have to thank. Number one, I want to thank Cynthia Loveman. Cynthia, I bet you were talking about this event right after we finished last year's event. So thank you for all the hard work you put into this year's event. To Jean, thank you for all your dedication and support to make this event happen. To Renato, thanks for being our action-orientated leader, and thanks for all you've done for the foundation board and for BCSS. I thoroughly enjoy working with you, Renato, so thank you. And to you, our donors, which is why we're here. We're here today to celebrate you. We're here to celebrate everything that you've been able to do for BCSS. If anybody knows about schizophrenia and severe psychosis, it is us. And that's one of the many reasons I thoroughly enjoy working for our organization. And I'm proud to say that I work for BCSS. We are involved with a truly unique organization. We work with families, and we work with schizophrenia and severe psychosis, which does make us unique. We're also a provincial organization, so it doesn't matter where you're located in this province. We do want to work with you, and we will not forget about you, whether you're in an urban center or you're in a very remote and rural area. We're all important, and we do have to recognize that, so thank you. It has not been an easy year. There's no doubt about it. Schizophrenia and severe psychosis are difficult enough in supporting families, and you throw in a global pandemic, and it has not been an easy year. But I truly have to give a shout out to our entire team who've just done a tremendous job to stay connected to our families. That is why we're here, and we have to do everything we can to stay connected to those families. So some of the things we've done, we've put our Strengthening Families Together, we put our partnership program, we've put our family support groups, all online in order to stay connected with the people that need us the most. So thank you to our frontline team for doing everything you can to stay connected. It truly is a team effort. And I have a quote that I want to share with you. During the AGM, I did mention this, but it's just too good to not repeat. And if you hadn't heard it, it is from the great Michael Jordan. Here goes. If you're trying to achieve, there will be obstacles. I've had them, everybody's had them. But obstacles do not have to stop you. If you run into a wall, don't turn around and give up, although sometimes that feels like it would be the easiest thing to do. Figure out how to climb it, go through it, or to work around it. And that's exactly what we have done this year. But in order to move forward, we're going to have to continue working together. So thank you for all you've done in the past, as well as for your continued support. But don't go anywhere. We have a few very exciting people to hear from coming up. We have Maxime with the Otsuka Lundback Alliance, Fidel, an amazing researcher and clinician who we're going to be hearing from here shortly, as well as from an incredible and very courageous family member, Guelda, who has many lessons to share with all of us. So thank you to each of you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the BCSS family. We are in this together, and I just can't say thank you enough. So thanks for being you, and please stick around for so many more exciting things coming up. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, Phaedra. Phaedra mentioned the Otsuka Lundback Alliance. Otsuka and Lundback are pharmaceutical companies that develop medications for brain diseases and other illnesses. Otsuka has graciously agreed to sponsor this virtual event, and I'd like to turn it over now to Otsuka's Associate Director for External Relations, Maxime Rouleau, who joins us from Montreal.
Hi, I'm Maxime with the Otsuka Lundback Alliance. It's my pleasure to be virtually here with you guys as you celebrate the virtual donor event for the BC Schizophrenia Society. As you know, it's the donors allowing BCSS to be able to keep the doors open and keep the programmings and also offer all the support that's currently needed in these times. 2020 has been a very challenging year for everybody. I think that since March, we've all had our lives completely changed. For a lot of us, it means that we're spending a lot more time at home and a lot less time with interacting with other people we loved in our families. So it is important to spend a moment together today, reconnect with other donors like you, other people who are supporting BCSS. And you are the most important people in the organization, other than the ones that are being supported by BCSS. Because of your work, the organization is there and is able to support the different activities and support your loved ones and everybody in British Columbia that is suffering from schizophrenia. So I hope to be in person next year with you to celebrate this important milestone, which is the Donor Appreciation event, and also making sure that we're all able to contribute in our different ways to support the mission and the activities of the Schizophrenia Society. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
On behalf of all of us on this webcast, thank you, Maxime, and thank you, Otsuka. Now it's my pleasure to share with you the following overview of BCSS services and programs. It highlights the prevalence of schizophrenia, the role of BCSS, and our successes in the last year. None of this would have been possible without your generous support.
Schizophrenia can be a devastating and serious illness, and for the 1 in 100 people affected worldwide, it can feel like they are lost, alone, and without hope. Support and compassion from family members and caregivers can lead to early diagnosis, proper treatment, and significantly improve the lives of loved ones coping with this mental illness. Since 1982, the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society has been supporting thousands of individuals and families affected by schizophrenia and psychosis throughout our province. Whether a family is just beginning to suspect that something is not right, or has been maintaining proper treatment for years, the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society connects with family and community members who are looking for help and assistance, online and in person. Programs and services are at the heart of our organization. Across the province, our regional educators provide direct one-on-one support, while monthly family support groups provide the opportunity to share stories of triumphs and struggles. Multi-week educational courses teach families how to better communicate and build relationships, not only within the family, but also with healthcare and emergency professionals. Our Kids and Teens in Control programs provide resources to help children and youth build compassion and connections with family members who live with mental illness. And our Partnership Education Presentation program continues to bring together citizens, corporations, government and community agencies, allowing the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society to challenge the stigma of mental illness through education, support, public policy, and research. All of these programs and services are supported by our generous volunteers who are advocates for families and crucial in the continued success of our organization. Each year, the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society is able to provide thousands of hours directly supporting families, allowing our programs to expand across the province, from urban centres to rural and northern communities throughout BC. Together, with the continued support of the provincial government, donors, partners, sponsors, staff, and volunteers, we are providing families across British Columbia a reason to hope and the means to cope.
Every year at this time, we share a family's experience with schizophrenia and with BCSS. This year, it's our pleasure to introduce you to Guelda Redman of Chilliwack, who shares her family's journey.
I'm Guelda Redman. My son Kai is 28 years old, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia 10 years ago. You know, he was just the sweetest little kid. He was very quiet, was not a hard child in any sense. And he was that way for quite a while. Like, he was just always, like, everybody loved Kai. He had these cute little blue eyes and the little white blonde hair. He was easygoing with anybody. He was just a really nice little kid. He liked to draw a lot, and he's amazing at Lego. As he got a little bit older, he would also do drawing, and he would love to he would get me to cut paper up and then staple it together so that it was in like a little book form. And then he would just go through and he would draw and write like a little story, but in drawings. He could express himself really well through that. When he was about 5 years old, there were a couple of times where he cried at night, and I went in and he said, "They won't be quiet." And I was like, "Who won't be quiet?" And he said, "There's just voices, they won't be quiet." And I think ever since then, even though I've been told several times it probably had nothing to do with anything, that ever since then, I've always really kind of watched him. And so to me, when I saw things happening, I knew it was more. I would say it was kind of the early teen years. As he got into his teen years, he started just being a little more defiant, which isn't that unusual, but it was unusual for him. He wasn't hanging out with friends anymore. He wasn't listening to his teachers. One of the things he dropped was he didn't want to go to his art classes. And that was weird because he's an artist. He stopped playing his guitars. He's like so many things that he just quit doing. And I could see, I mean, he was unhappy. I think that as a mom, you know your child, right? And teenage angst or behavior, it wasn't something I wasn't prepared for or didn't kind of expect. But his was so out of character that I just knew. I think a lot of it was mother's intuition. And I would take him to a counselor because I knew there was a struggle. And the counselors kept saying, "Oh, he's just being a normal teenage boy." For me, it was like, no, but that's not my son. I know that's not my son. I know there's something going on. There's something going on. He was living in Chilliwack with his cousin, sharing an apartment. And one of the things with Kai at this point in time was that his hygiene was terrible. And his hygiene in his apartment was terrible as well. And so he and his cousin were really struggling with that. He came home. We get up in the morning, we're going and we're doing our stuff, and I go downstairs to do laundry, and there's Kai. He's laying on the bed, and he's just laying there staring at the ceiling, and he looks absolutely just... Anybody who knows somebody with and I hear this from a lot of other parents, is that you can tell from the eyes. They're like haunted. They're haunted eyes. And he just was laying there with these eyes, and I was just, what's going on? And he said, I need help. I knew he was struggling, I knew that, but I had no idea to what extent it was. I kept saying, Kai, do you hear voices? And he always said no. And then finally he admitted, and he said, Mom, you know how you keep asking me if I hear voices? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I do. So at that point, I'm like, now what do I do? I have no idea what to do for you. In my head, I'm thinking, well, it's a brain thing, so I need to find, you know, like a psychologist or something for him. I had no idea that I needed to go to the GP. I had no idea. And this is one of the things that frustrates me, is that I had no idea what to do. The first time that he ended up in the hospital, he was down in his room and he was cutting himself. He had a knife, and he was just kind of not doing like deep cuts, just kind of like he was carving something in his arm. And I saw him doing that, and I said, what are you doing? And I said, okay, you know what? You need to go to the hospital, right? And he said, I'm not going. And so I said, well, you are gonna go. If you won't go, I'll phone the ambulance. So he basically got up, went outside, got in his truck, and drove away. At that point, I didn't realize that you can't just call an ambulance and they'll come and get your mentally ill child. I found out that you have to actually call the RCMP. So we called the RCMP and we told them what was going on. They went, and he had parked down by the Fraser River. And when they got there, he was coming out of the Fraser River. He had been up to at least up to his knees. This is in January. Immediately at that point, it was, you have to go to the hospital. It was obvious that he was, if not trying to hurt himself, hoping that it would happen. It was terrifying. And you sit in emergency for like 24 hours waiting for a bed. And we just stayed, everyone saying, go home, go home. It was like, we just couldn't do it. We couldn't leave him alone. It was terrifying. And still at that point thinking, just the fear of not knowing what was gonna happen. Would this ever get better? Would we ever get our son back? Where was our son? You really honestly feel like you've lost your child. Our social worker basically said, you have to tell them you're not taking him home. You have to force it, basically. And so that's what we did. We would go and visit him, and the nurses would come out and they'd say, well, Kai would like to come home this weekend with you. And we would go, no, we won't take him. We can't take him. And we just kept saying, no. We knew that if we started taking him, the system would push him back out. And so we basically had to just look him in the eye and say, we won't take you home anymore. It was hard, but I truly, truly, truly believed that if I didn't do that, he'd be dead. So everywhere he was, I would go visit him at least once during the week, depending on how close he was. And we would go together every weekend and spend hours with him. Every time I walked out of a building without him, I would just cry. We would cry all the way home. It was the hardest thing that we've ever had to do. I mean, if we weren't absolutely positive that he would not live without us doing this, it wouldn't have been something that we could do. when your child gets ill with something like that, your immediate reaction is, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? And that's a terrifying thought. There's this huge, just racking guilt weight on your shoulders. And going through these education series and talking to people and learning that it's not necessarily anything that I did. It's what your vulnerability is to it when you're born. It's a bit of genetics, it's traumas, it's, you know, all these different things all together, and realizing that I didn't cause this was such a huge relief to me and to my husband, that, you know, we didn't make him sick. The education was huge. And then also to be able to share all of that knowledge then with our family members. I have a fairly large family. Mark has family, he's got 2 siblings and I have 6 siblings, and our parents. Having that support, I don't know that you could do it on your own. I think that, you know, having them just reassuring us that we were doing the right thing. And the social workers too, you know, saying you're doing the right thing, you're doing the right thing. You know, there's one thing that I've never done is I've never not told somebody that Kai has schizophrenia. It's not something I am ashamed of. For me, it never even occurred to me to not tell people, to be honest. It's a reality, and I always figure knowledge is power, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of it. It's amazing what that kid has gone through. Donating to the BC Schizophrenia Society, you're donating to so many different facets of what's needed. So you're donating for like supportive family, for education, and for research. Research especially. Let's get rid of this. Let's just like, we want this gone. I want never anybody else ever to feel what I felt when I found out that my child was in the Fraser River considering suicide. Once he was in some of these treatment center places, especially UBC, they got his medications under control, and we would go visit him. And I can't remember the exact moment, but I remember just this sense of, oh my gosh, he smiled. And thinking, wow. Like, can you imagine just a smile? The fact that he just showed a little bit of expression. I mean, it wasn't even a laugh. It was, he showed a little bit of expression in his face. And I was like, wow. So, and then at that point I thought, oh yeah, he's there. And then the first time he laughed again, right? It was like, or that he cracked a joke or something like that. I mean, he doesn't crack jokes very often, but sometimes, you know, he's got this quirky little smile. It's like, it's very kind of one-sided, like a, you know, but he'll sort of say something, and then his gets his smile on, and it's just like, oh, I love that smile. I see Kai now. Yeah. The difference in where he was and where he is today, I had no idea if I'd get my Kai back. I had no idea. I had to kind of, in a way, I guess, make myself okay with it if it didn't happen. But I kept fighting for him. And I have him back. He's not 100%, but he is, you know, he's smiling again. He laughs. My daughter, like I said, has two little ones, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And oh my gosh, they love him and he loves them. From a person who couldn't even smile for a while, had no expression, had the darkest, most haunted eyes that I've ever seen in a person, to someone now who smiles and hugs and, you know, picks up his little niece and will be carrying her around, and his little nephew, and you know, never ever give up. Never give up.
We thank Gwelda for sharing her journey with us. We know this isn't easy, but we also know that many of you have walked a similar path. We are very grateful to Gwelda and her family for their 7 years of fundraising initiatives for BCSS. Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about Gwelda and Kai, please make sure to read her letter on the BCSS website. It's on the front page under the title, "In My Heart, I Knew Different." You have to scroll down a little bit, but that's the name of the letter. "In My Heart, I Knew Different." And thank you again to AA Farmer for making it possible for Gwelda to tell her story in this video recording. I should mention that if you want to see any of these videos again, all of them will be available on our website soon at bcss.org. Now, before we begin our question and answer session with Dr. Fidel Vila-Rodriguez, it's my pleasure to share some exciting news. As you know, many donors designate specific donations for research. In recent years, we have partnered with the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research in funding research trainee grants. But it has been some time since we held our own competition. Well, in November, we launched one. We called it Gap Funding for Research in Schizophrenia. Recognizing that funding for established research projects in schizophrenia may have been negatively affected by issues related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the foundation decided to launch a competition to provide gap funding. We are offering 3 grants of $25,000 for established peer-reviewed research projects that have been running for a minimum of 2 years. We plan to announce the recipients of the grants soon. What I can say is this, that the selection committee reviewing the applications noted that all of the applications are related to clinical research. And this means that these projects have a direct impact on patients with schizophrenia. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our guest for the special question and answer session. Dr. Fidel Vila-Rodriguez is a busy man. He's the director of the schizophrenia program and an assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry at the Faculty of Medicine, University of British Columbia. He's also a member of the Society Board, and we're so pleased that he can be with us today. Welcome, Fidel, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Renato. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
We're really excited about the opportunity to ask you all these questions. I just wanted to make sure that for those of you who are watching and want to ask a question, make sure that you send your questions via the chat function by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of the middle of your screen. And then you'll have a window popping up on the right side of your screen. Go to the bottom of it and start typing your questions and then hit enter. We have some assistants who are going to send the questions to me, and then I can pass them along to Dr. Fidel. So Dr. Fidel, I think just to begin, while we wait for more questions to come in, I'd like to maybe get us started, and without getting into a lot of specifics, could you give us an initial brief overview of any recent trends in schizophrenia research?
Definitely, Renato. And I prepared a couple of slides to also prompt questions from donors. And I was wondering if it'd be all right sharing the screen.
Certainly, go for it.
And while I do that, I want to also share with all the attendees to the event how hard Renato as the chair of the foundation and the staff at the BC Schizophrenia Society work to make this happen. I'm sure that I've only seen the tip of the iceberg, but the devotion and the hard work that they put into this is terrific. It's impressive, and yeah, they are passionate. So thank you so much for doing that. I think it's a very important. It's very important to have people like yourselves kind of driving the ship.
Thank you so much. But we're all in this together. It's us, the families, the staff, and all of the people across British Columbia. So it's thank you very much for the nice comments. But I think we're one big family, and I really feel a part of it. So it's a real pleasure.
And when I was asked to participate, I immediately said yes, because it's extremely important for myself as an academic, as a psychiatrist, as a clinician, and as a person who has a strong interest in schizophrenia research and in people who suffer this illness, to make these connections happen. This type of events where a clinician and a researcher has the opportunity to reach out to the community, to establish bridges of communication are essential. Because it's a two-way street here. I'm going to share with you a couple of slides with some information, but I always find I learn a lot from the questions that people bring up. So I should quickly present my disclosures. As Renato mentioned, I was recently had the privilege to join the board of directors of the BC Schizophrenia Society as a volunteer. And again, I'm impressed by the passion and hard work that goes into their work. And I'm very glad to join those efforts. I have received honorarium from Janssen as the advisory board, and the lab that I direct has received in-kind equipment to do investigator-initiated research. If anyone has any questions about my disclosure, I'm very happy to discuss them and clarify any points about them. I thought I would start with a very condensed overview of the facts about schizophrenia. What do we know? Just to set the tone and where are we at? So we all know that schizophrenia is a prevalent condition. Around the world, it affects 20 million people, or is estimated that it's around 1% of the population. I find myself a bit conflicted to have to state this, but I find that the message that schizophrenia is an illness of the brain, it's extremely important to emphasize. That's a fact. Some of the most characteristic symptoms in schizophrenia and of this brain illness include, but they're not limited to, cognitive impairment, negative symptoms, which are symptoms where the person has loses the drive, the motivation, and the kind of will to do things that they like we've heard from the family member in the video. Also very characteristic are hallucinations, like hearing voices, and delusions, which are fixed false beliefs. Schizophrenia is a devastating illness. It is associated with considerable disability, and it can affect, and it affects educational and occupational performance and achievement. People with schizophrenia are 2 to 3 times more likely to die early than the general population. And this is not only a result of the impact of treatment, but it's also a reflection of the fact that the impact of the illness takes a toll on physical health, the ability of people to take care of themselves and embrace healthy habits with diet, physical activity. And but schizophrenia is treatable. That's another key message. It's treatable today. There are effective treatments that help people doing better. And that's a very important message. there's also strategies that can help people who suffer schizophrenia and their families to make the most to perform at their potential. So strategies like supported housing, supported employment are effective management strategies. My second slide to conclude is an overview of mortality rates in psychiatric population compared to the general population. And for this, I took data from several papers and I plotted on a solid line what's been the age-adjusted death rates over time since the early 1990s to later in the 20th century. And you can see, number one, that before we had any treatments like medications or ECT in 1938, the mortality rates were significantly higher in psychiatric population. And many of these people had severe and had schizophrenia and psychotic disorders. Over time, things have improved. And these are ecological data that it said. So we cannot establish definite causality, but we can see how the trend has been to narrow this gap and to the mortality to go down as more treatments have been available. So one of the key messages that I think it's important to take away from this slide is, number one, severe illness, mental health illnesses, untreated, are lethal. And treatments do work and do make a difference. And with this, Renato, I think we can then move on to answer questions from the audience.
Yes, and we've been receiving lots of them, Fidel, and there's a whole series of them related to medications. So I was thinking that maybe what I could do is I'll read you some of the questions, and then you can decide in how you want to formulate your answer, because there's a lot of commonality, and some of it is talking about current medication, and some of them are questions related to what's coming in the future. So I'll just read you some of the questions. So the first one, it's starting at the beginning, which is, what are the most used medications to treat schizophrenia? And can you give us a brief rundown on any significant developments? Now, there's another one which is related to what people do when they go off their medication. What do you recommend to prevent relapse when the patient, who's on extended leave with the Vancouver Community Mental Health Team, has been taken off medication by them? A question about clozapine, which this person's son is taking. Sometimes he reduces his dosage by 10 milligrams for a few days. He then increases back to 250 milligrams. I'd like to know what effect this may have on his health, i.e. brain health. Another one related to medication is this one. Is genetic testing available to us to help find out which medications will work best and have the fewest side effects? And there's one I don't understand, but I'll read it anyway. Are there formulation developments that improve consistent PK levels? And finally, what are the long-term effects of clozapine? So not sure if you want to start maybe with clozapine in general, and then talk about any new medications, and then perhaps some of these specific questions about side effects and so on. What do you think?
Definitely. I think I'm going to preview my answers to the questions by saying that in an event like this, where we have very limited amount of time, I find it always very challenging, and I never try to provide medical advice. So I'm not going to be able in this short span of time to provide any specific medical advice for any concrete situation, but I can definitely give an overview that can help people have kind of a forest view of news, new treatments, and an overview of some of the questions that you've mentioned. So perhaps in terms of medications, I should say that up to this point, most of the medications that have been used and are used to treat schizophrenia are fundamentally variations to target one specific chemical in the brain. And people have heard about this, dopamine. So most of the treatments are medications that help antagonizing. So they bind to the dopamine receptors, and that helps decreasing the symptoms, particularly hallucinations and delusions. Clozapine is a very different treatment because it does not act fundamentally on this dopamine receptor mechanism. It affects other chemicals and probably has other effects like regulating the immune system and the level of inflammation. And clozapine is a very different type of medication in that way. So what are the news in terms of medications available? As I mentioned, the focus has been a lot on targeting this neurotransmitter, dopamine. Some of the most recent advances and research and some of the medications that will be coming out target other neurotransmitters, other chemicals. An example, just for people to get a sense of when they hear new medications, NMDA receptors. There's a lot of interest to regulate the levels of glutamate in the brain. Glutamate is the main excitatory neurotransmitter. So there's a lot of research and compounds and medications are going to be coming out regulating the levels of glutamate. In the same vein, there's going to be medications that target the inhibitory neurotransmitter, GABA. Those are another medications. Other targets in terms of medications are going to be the acetylcholine receptor. So the key message here is the medications that are coming out are looking at treatment, at the pharmacological treatment for schizophrenia, targeting other chemicals other than dopamine. Another aspect in terms of new treatments are medications that already exist, but they are going to be formulated. That means that you have a medication and you can put it in different forms to take it. You can take it by mouth, you can have it as an injection, and some of the new medications that are coming out increase the convenience. Some of the new formulations allow for a person with schizophrenia to have an injection once every 3 months. So it's the same compound, but you increase the convenience and probably you increase the chances that people take the medications. So those are also some of the new treatments. Last but not least, we've talked about medications, but there's also a new array of treatments that are non-pharmacological. And there was a question about cognitive remediation. So all the treatments, there's a series of treatments that address this very important aspect in schizophrenia, the cognitive difficulties that people with schizophrenia have. Cognitive remediation is one of these treatments. And so for people who may not be familiar with cognitive remediation is a cognitive rehabilitation treatment that consists of training thinking skills for people with schizophrenia in order to improve everyday life functioning. There's other forms of cognitive treatments and rehabilitation. Metacognitive training is another one. Targets specifically this tendency that happens in schizophrenia of jumping to conclusions without all the information and form delusions and false beliefs. So all these more psychological interventions and targeting cognition, they're coming up strong. There's a lot of evidence building up in clinical trials for these two in particular, cognitive remediation and metacognitive training. And then in terms of non-pharmacological treatments, there's something called non-invasive neurostimulation treatments. These are treatments that leverage the capacity to stimulate the brain by eliciting electric currents. And some of those include transcranial, magnetic stimulation. Also, electroconvulsive therapy is returning as a very effective treatment to treat delusions and hallucinations. And I'm just going to stop here because I've been talking a lot. And so just going to check in and see.
Yes, I think that was a really great overview, Fidel. You talked about medication, you talked about cognitive remediation, and then convulsive therapy or magnetic therapy. But if you wouldn't mind, just because people still have some questions about medications, and then we can move to some of the other questions. So two related questions. One was, what are the long-term effects of clozapine or clozapine? And then the other one is that question related to a person who changes the dosage of the medication. Does that have any bad effects on the brain? So I don't know which one you want to start with.
Let's start with side effects, because it's definitely a question that comes up a lot, and it's very important to acknowledge. First of all, side effects are one side of the coin of any intervention. If you have an intervention, something that can help treating an illness, it will have the potential of having some side effects. That applies to psychological interventions, to vaccines, to anything. Everything has that potential. It's important to know about side effects and what we can do to mitigate them. Some of the long-term side effects associated with medications for schizophrenia and psychosis have to do with the risk of developing abnormal movements. These are in the form of something called dyskinesias. Dyskinesias are abnormal movements that consist of involuntary movements that are repeated. Some of the abnormal movements are called dystonias, which is the contraction of a muscle group. And others have to do with the levels of a hormone called prolactin. And many medications increase the prolactin levels, and that can have an impact on the reproductive system and sexual function. And these, by the way, the risk accrues over time. So the longer someone has been on these medications, the more risk. So that is one of the risks. And the way to mitigate it is to always try to follow your healthcare provider direction and to work with them in perhaps there's a need to take a medication to help with these side effects and help mitigating them. Perhaps an adjustment in the dose, maybe going down a little bit in the dose can help. Always check in with your healthcare provider before doing any changes, which leads to the second question. Again, it's very important to check in and to engage your healthcare provider before making any changes. And it's important that if you want to make changes in your medication and you feel strongly about it, that you engage in that discussion. In my practice, I always take in that factor. I weigh in what is patients' and families' preferences. Let's work together. Let's come with kind of arrangements that are safe, but that are also take into consideration patients' preferences. So I wouldn't do anything without trying to engage your team, your treatment team, before doing it.
Yes, and Fidel, there's a question specific to that, and that is, when and how can families be involved in that reassessment of medication? Should it be involved from the very beginning, or is there a time in which the health service or health provider would prefer to involve the family, and a time when they would prefer not to? I don't know how you would answer that.
So I think it's a complex question, because I appreciate there are different levels of of complexity here. From my perspective as a practitioner, as a psychiatrist, my stance is always to engage families from the very beginning, and as much as possible, and as much as the person that I treat allows that engagement for. So it's a complicated and dynamic situation, but I think it's always very important whenever there are family members who are eager to be engaged and take part, and the person that I treat allows and listens to the advice, that it's important to bring them in. I would say that as soon as possible and along the way.
Okay.
I appreciate there's a lot of individual variability. Other professionals might feel different, and that's a source of variability in practice that I appreciate it exists. I think from perhaps I don't need that prompt, but perhaps if families, and I know they try really hard, and patients try to convey, look, this is important to me, that my family is part of this discussion, because they are going to be critical for me to understand maybe what you're telling me, and be engaged in helping me with following any advice or guidance or recommendations that you make. I think that helps professionals to see that perspective of how important it is to have families engaged. It's an asset.
Your signal's breaking up. Can you hear us? Can you hear me, Fidel? I don't know if you can still hear me. If you can, I just wanted to follow up, because now we're on a hot button topic, which someone has brought up, and that relates to involuntary treatment. And the question is, many of us have seen that involuntary.
Hi, Renato. Now I can hear you back.
Okay, good. So I'm just moving on to a hot button topic, because there's a question here from a viewer who wants to know what your thoughts are about involuntary treatment. So the question is, many of us have seen that involuntary treatment helped our family member not be trapped in psychosis. Have you seen the value of involuntary treatment? And how could families work to protect the BC Mental Health Act so that our family members continue to have this protection? So I'm just wondering if you have an opinion about that.
So it's an excellent question, and it touches on a very, I think, very sensitive topic, where different stakeholders at a societal level have different opinions, and sometimes strong opinions. And I think to protect this very important and very helpful resource that is involuntary admission, it's important to continue to engage in bringing to perhaps other stakeholders that are not close to the reality of what happens at home when someone is severely ill, does not have insight, and does not see the need to seek help. It's to bring that perspective back to people who might not have that. I think professionals and people who have strong opinions against involuntary treatment, I have a strong feeling that they've never experienced firsthand, or someone close to them, being in a situation where you see a person stopping eating, harming themselves, not realizing that they are suffering an illness of their brain that does not allow them to have insight that they need treatment. If they had that experience firsthand, they would understand immediately that sometimes in very concrete situations, as a society, not only families and professionals, but as a society, we have a duty to take care of people. And I think that reality, in my my reading of how some people react, I think they don't have that direct knowledge. And I think that's very important to convey.
Thank you. Fidel, I noticed we're at the top of the hour. Are you okay to continue for a few more minutes? Because I know there's a lot of questions that are still coming in.
Absolutely. Let's give it another 5 minutes and address as many questions as we can.
All right. So I'd like to read you one that we received by email, and that is, what is being done currently to test relatives of people with schizophrenia for pre-existing tendencies for the illness? And is anything being done to alleviate those tendencies?
Excellent question. So I'm going to back up for a few seconds and share a bit of perspective in that we know that part of the etiology or what causes schizophrenia is driven by probably many different genes. So there's a genetic component. And so we also know that many times relatives of people who suffer schizophrenia, they might have what I think this person is alluding to in their question, tendencies. Sometimes what the studies have shown is that there might be more subtle cognitive difficulties in relatives of people who suffer schizophrenia. So that's the background. We know that that exists. What can we do in people who don't have, who have not manifested the diagnosis of schizophrenia and don't have those symptoms, but may have some of that, what we call liability, or to know that they exist? People are working on this. They're looking for what it's called biomarkers. And right now there are a lot of different biomarkers that are being investigated, from tests like doing imaging or EEG, electroencephalogram, looking for biomarkers in the bloodstream to detect both people who may be a lot of risk of developing schizophrenia or are in transition, as well as potentially relatives. So none of that has been applied a lot in relatives. But to address the concern, I would say that if someone is concerned about that potential liability, it's then extremely important to really stick to some of the fundamentals of looking after oneself. And these should be treated as medicines, not like kind of big statements, but being very respectful with your own rhythms to sleep, preserve sleep. Physical activity, it should be treated as a medicine. So if you're concerned that maybe there's some risk, like be very intentional at adding as much physical activity as you can. Be respectful with your rhythms and your sleep, and avoid substances, things like cannabis, excessive alcohol. Try to avoid. Those are going to be protective factors.
Okay, very good. I have a question here. Is an MRI at birth to determine ventricular size a reliable predictor of the development of schizophrenia?
No, it is not. And so I think that's the clear message that is not. Now, part of the research that it has been done, and recently, like 2 months ago, there was a paper showing that in people who suffer schizophrenia, with a technique that probably many people have heard about these days, machine learning, they were able to see patterns in an MRI scan that would distinguish two different groups of people with schizophrenia. But this research was done in thousands of people who suffered schizophrenia once they had developed their condition. The most reliable marker or kind of symptom dimension that is present early on is cognitive impairment. Cognitive impairment is present many times years before delusions and hallucinations emerge. So very strong difficulties with learning at school, adjusting. Those are the markers that are most promising, in my opinion, and there's some research to back that up.
Okay, two very quick questions. You don't have to spend a lot of time on these answers, but they're interesting ones. The next one is related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And here it is. Will the COVID-19 vaccines be safe to have with the medications for schizophrenia?
Excellent question. And I have to admit that I've not looked at the data just yet to make a 100% firm claim and statement. But from what I've read so far, like many other vaccines, there's no risk reported of having an interaction with medications. So I think it's the key message here is from what I know at this point and what I know about vaccines and taking vaccines, they are safe for people with schizophrenia and taking any medications. That's not to say that we need to be mindful and monitor what happens as we progress now in vaccinating entire population, because if people have, I'm pretty sure many have followed the news, in the large studies for these vaccines, they've treated more than 30,000 people. And now that they are doing vaccination in the UK, when they started to vaccinate people, they found that 2 people who had very, very severe allergies developed a very strong reaction. So that warning has come out. So we need to monitor for very rare side effects and learn from them. But the general statement is they are safe and people should be vaccinated.
Okay, and our last question before we wrap it up is this one. And I know that this is not an easy one to answer, but maybe you can give it your best shot in 30 seconds. How far away are we from a cure for schizophrenia?
That's an excellent question. And the honest answer on one hand is to say, I don't really know. But on the other hand, I also know that as I showed in that graph earlier on, in the decrease in mortality, I know that we already have come a long ways. We've made a lot of progress. And investing in clinical research, investing in research as a way to achieve not only excellence in clinical treatments, but developing treatments that push forward and advance even better outcomes in schizophrenia, it's extremely important. So I don't know when, but I definitely know we are closer than we were before.
That's wonderful. And we're all, committed to finding a better tomorrow. So as you know, in our logo, we talk about hope, and we want to find the means to cope and a reason to hope. So thank you so much, Dr. Fidel. I know that there are so many questions that were very detailed about, there's other questions that we haven't got to that are very detailed pharmacological questions. But as an overview, we greatly appreciate you giving us this time on a Saturday. And we really, really thank you for being so forthright and patient with us as we pass along all these questions from so many families and donors. So thanks again for all of your support and your continued sharing of knowledge.
Not a problem. It's been a pleasure. And I'm sorry that we didn't have more time. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a strong will to continue this, building bridges and work together. So this will not be the last. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So I'd like to just continue by saying that if you'd like to review any part of this discussion, please check in again at the BCSS website in the near future for a transcript of this session. And also the video of this entire event will also be available online at the BCSS website. So as we wrap up our time together, I'd like to once again thank our sponsor for today's virtual event, the Otsuka Lundbeck Alliance. who allowed us to organize this without dipping into our donations. I'd also like to say that if you found this event helpful, please let others know about the benefits of membership to the society. It's only $15 a person, and we would love to see that membership grow so we can do more in the future. In a similar way, if you know any companies who would be interested in partnering with us, please let us know. We really want to increase our connection with companies and associations. Also, we welcome your feedback about anything, but specifically about this session. There will be a link in the chat for a survey that you can fill out, and we will also be sending you a survey in the mail. So thank you very much for taking the time to think about what we could do in the future, or any kind of feedback you'd like to pass along to us. But most importantly, thank you, donors, for your fantastic support. We are truly, truly grateful. Before we leave you, I want to also thank the entire staff at BCSS, especially Cynthia Loveman, Jean Fung, Andrew Stewart, Rachel Phillips, and Catherine Larnan-Trout. They've been working hard behind the scenes to make this event happen, and they've all been following up with you, so you probably know them. One other thing is if you received the mask that we sent in the mail with the invitation, we would love to see photos of you wearing your masks. We can use them for our social media and for our website. So if you want to send us a picture of yourself wearing the BCSS mask, please send the picture to events@bcss.org. If you haven't received a mask and you'd like one, please email us at that same address and we'll send you one. That's events@bcss.org. So that's it again. Thank you, donors. Thank you so much for your time. As we close, please have a wonderful, safe holiday season. Best wishes to you all, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.